In this video, I'm going to take a look at and show you some tests and differences between the minimum focus distance and the focus breathing between the Tamron 17-28 f2.8 for Sony E-mount and the Sigma 16-28 f2.8 for Sony E-mount. Mainly because these are two somewhat significant differences in the way that these lenses perform against each other, and both of these attributes surprised and disappointed me on one of these lenses, so let's talk about it. So I've owned the Tamron 17-28 f2.8 lens for Sony E-mount for a couple of years now, and I've used it mainly on my Sony A7 III. It's compact, it's simple, and it's held up well for me. I think the image quality is great. I've really had no issues with it. And recently I got a Sony A7 IV to add to my camera lineup, and I wanted another wide angle lens to go with that new camera so I didn't have to always switch this one between cameras. But I thought this time I'd try the Sigma 16-28 f2.8 instead of getting another duplicate Tamron lens. The Sigma was just a bit wider, of course, on the wide end, going to 16 millimeters. It was a good price, pretty much the same price as the Tamron. Sigma lenses have always seemed to be built really well. They feel really good in the hands, and they can feel like a more premium product at times. So I bought the Sigma 16-28 to have a slightly different option. However, when I started using the Sigma 16-28 here in my home office and studio to film videos and reviews, I noticed, to me, quite a drastic difference in the minimum focus distances between these two lenses. And I also noticed the difference in focus breathing between the two lenses as well. And yes, although all of this information, like minimum focus distance, was listed in the documentation, which I could have referenced before I bought the Sigma, I just didn't even think about needing or wanting to know certain things before I bought the Sigma lens. I didn't think any minor differences would be that big of a deal. But it turns out, for me, the way I started using the Sigma lens here in my home studio, it did matter to me. Specifically, again, the minimum focus distance apparently really mattered to me, and I noticed how much I do not like the minimum focus distance on the Sigma. And long story short, the Sigma has a longer minimum focus distance than the Tamron, which just means that you can't get an object as close to the Sigma as you can to the Tamron. Or maybe you could think of it as the Tamron just has a really short minimum focus distance. And I've just gotten used to using the Tamron in that way. But either way, I'm going to go through some visual tests, distance measurements, and show you how these differences in minimum focus distance and focus breathing work between these two lenses. Because if you're looking to get one of these lenses, this information might matter to you. It might not, but since I noticed and since it mattered to me, I wanted to do these tests and hopefully help you decide between these two lenses. So let's get into it. All right, so we're gonna test the minimum focus distance of the Tamron 17-28, which is on the camera now. That's the Sigma 16-28. So I've got our little friend here, Mr. Scully, set up. We're going to put him down, put the A7 IV in manual focus, and get it as close as we can in focus. So I'm in manual focus. I've got peaking display on, and we're gonna get this guy just as close as we can get him. So right about there looks to be in focus. I see peaking display on the camera's monitor, and now we just need to measure the distance, because what I don't like about most lens specs is they give you the minimum focus distance, but it seems to be from the back of the lens to the object instead of the front of the lens to the object. I really care more about the front of the lens to the object, because you can see here how close I am able to get Mr. Scully to the front of that Tamron 17-28 lens. And if we measure this, it's really hard to measure, it's so close. I mean, honestly, I can't even get the tape measure in there, but the nose, his nose right there is about 1.5 inches from the front of the glass of the lens. Now let's compare that to the Sigma 16-28. I gotta switch lenses, hang on. All right, so I've switched lenses now. That's the Tamron 17-28, and the Sigma 16-28 is now on my Sony A7 IV. I did not move the camera, and I did not move Mr. Scully. So the distance is basically the same between the front of the lens and Mr. Scully. And if we look here, we can see that Mr. Scully's out of focus. And just to confirm, I will rack the focus of the Sigma lens to the back so I know which direction I need to go, and then I'll re-rack all the way to the closest focus distance of the lens itself. And now we will just push Mr. Scully back until I see focus peaking about the same place to where it looks sharp in all of my monitors. That's about the distance, and we're now at about, so that's about 4 inches away. Now, we were at 1.5 with the Tamron. We're at about 4 inches. That's a 2.5 inch difference. Is that really going to matter? It might, depending on how you use the lens and what you want to do with it. If you're going to be up close to the lens, and typically with a wide angle lens, you need to be close, otherwise you're just going to look further away. That's why I actually like wide angle lenses, so I can be close to the camera. And where it mattered for me a couple of times is where I was going to do hold products up to the lens and have the lens change focus. And I just found with small objects, like really small audio cables, when I need to hold those up to the lens, I need them to fill the frame. I don't want to reach for the zoom ring and zoom in. I just want to hold them up and have the camera focus on them. But since it's so small, I need to hold it as close to the lens as I can get it. With the Tamron, I can get very close. With the Sigma, I have to be a little further away, hence making the small object even smaller. So if we do the Sony A7 III there, I gotta hide my face because the Sony sees my face. So there you go, like I'm very close to the lens, and I just can't do that as well with the Sigma. It's a minor thing, but it's something that I noticed when I got the Sigma 16-28, and I'm still debating on whether or not I dislike that one feature as much, plus the focus breathing when it does rack focus when you are close like that. The Sigma breathes quite a lot more than the Tamron when you're at its widest and when you're holding things up to the lens and having the lens and the camera focus close and then far away. The Tamron doesn't have a lot of breathing. Sigma has more, and that's also just something to be aware of. Make up your own mind. That's my 2 cents. All right, a quick side shot because I want to show you how close we can get to the Tamron from a side angle. We can get right up there, let it focus, and you can see how close I'm holding the object right there, and I'm still in focus right about, that's about the minimum right there. So that far. Stand by. And here's a side shot of the Sigma and how close I can get with this object from the side. So that's about as close as I can get, and we're now that far. And it does make a difference on how much I can actually magnify an object and show to you or not on the interwebs with the Sigma 16-28. That's as close as I can get with the Sigma lens. And I'll put these side by side so you can see how much or how little I can magnify objects if I need to with the Sigma versus the Tamron lens. If I want a larger, I'm going to zoom in post or use a different lens. All right, so I actually want to take some quick measurements of the minimum focus distance based on Tamron's specs here, which is 7.5 inches minimum focus distance per the specifications. So if we measure our minimum focus, Mr. Scully here, from the front of his or her nose to the back, it's a little hard to get the tape measure exactly in there, but we can see that we're about 7.5 inches right there, which would be roughly the sensor inside the camera. So that makes sense. 7.5 inches from the sensor to where the minimum focusing object that the lens can focus on. I mean, I still like to know how close to the front of the lens I can get. And again, we're still at that 1.5, 1 3/4 distance of the nearest object to the front of the lens. All right, let's test the Sigma. All right, the Sigma 16-28, and we'll measure from the closest object, Mr. Scully's nose, to the back, and we're at about 9.5 inches to what would be the sensor. And per Sigma's specifications, they say 9.9 inches. And yeah, that makes sense. Again, roughly the closest object to the back, about 9.9 inches, about where the sensor would be. So, you know, that still puts us at that rough 4.5 inches from the front of the lens. So again, you just can't get as close to this lens as you can with the Tamron. All right, and here's a couple of tests. This is the Sigma 16-28. It's at its widest at 16 millimeters, and we'll just hold this tape measure up. Let's see how close we can get. It's not quite in focus, so I have to back off. and that's just not what I'm used to with the Tamron. So I have to back off to that 4.5 inches. And you can also notice the edges of the frame as it racks focus. See how the focus breathing does. Oh, didn't get it. And we'll do that again with the focus. Oh, I just want to hold it closer and I can't. So I've got to practice at holding it further away. That's why it's having a hard time grabbing it, because I'm too close to the lens. Do this a couple more times and we'll move over to the Tamron. Yeah, that's quite a bit in my opinion. And it's just something that my eye caught the first time I put the lens on and put it in this position. When I'm doing that, how much the room moves. Let's do it one more time. One last time. All right, over to the Tamron. All right, Tamron 17-28 have not moved the camera. Camera's in the same position. It's a slightly narrower field of view, but really it's about the same. So we'll do the same test. We'll see how close I can get. And there is some focus breathing. I just think it's smoother focus breathing than the Sigma. I don't know if it's more. The Sigma seems to have more. But the Tamron just doesn't seem to bug me as much. So it looks to me like the Sigma breathes a little bit more, but there's something else to it, and I think I finally figured it out. The field of view obviously changes with every lens based on how much it focus breathes or not. Both of these lenses have a little bit of focus breathing, but their fields of view change oppositely. And what I mean by that is when I hold something up close to the Tamron, the field of view actually narrows like this. Watch the edges of the frame. So with the Tamron, as I hold something up, the edges of the frame here actually pull in and you get less view even though that view is out of focus. And that to me seems more natural, and that seems like something maybe I would expect. But if we look at the Sigma's field of view actually gets wider as I hold objects up close to it. Watch the edges of the frame. And as that comes into focus, you can actually see more of my office back there, which doesn't really help us because the wider field of view is out of focus anyway. But I find it just, something to note that that's what the Sigma is doing versus the Tamron. The Sigma's field of view gets wider as you hold objects up close to it, and the Tamron's field of view gets more narrow as you do close focusing. Also, keep this in mind. Since the Sigma can't focus as closely, if we're given a fixed object, say my face, and we're holding up objects to the Sigma versus the Tamron, the Sigma only pulls its focus from my face as close as it can, whereas the Tamron, given the same camera position and my face in the same position, the Tamron's focus pull is further because the Tamron can pull focus closer to its own lens. So the Sigma's focus pull is actually shorter, but yet the frame moves more within that less amount of work that the Sigma is doing. The Tamron seemingly can do a longer focal pull from my face to an object, but yet in that longer focal pull, the Tamron's field of view doesn't change as much to my eye. So with the Sigma, less work in focusing, but more change in the field of view. For me, here in my home studio, I really got the Sigma so that if I wanted to have the camera low on the desk looking up at me, much like you saw in this video, I'd have a slightly wider field of view than the Tamron. And again, just so I'd have some more experience and more options with different lenses. But I just can't hold up small objects and magnify them as much without zooming in post with the Sigma. Kind of a bummer, but I did keep the lens. It's been great other than this really minor minimum focus distance difference. The focus breathing difference really isn't that drastic and really doesn't bother me either way on either lens. It's just interesting the way that they focus breathed in opposite directions when the lens was focusing closely. So I hope some of this information was either helpful or at least mildly entertaining. I will leave some links below to both of these lenses and the cameras that I'm using in this video. And of course, if you like this video, hit those old like and subscribe buttons below and leave a comment if this video helped you. But if it did not help you, why are you still watching? Anyway, later.